Hi, and welcome to DNA After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a new episode or any notifications about a new episode. Tonight, I will be doing a book review, and this book is a little bit different than the ones I typically review. So, this book is actually a fiction book, which I'm really excited because I don't typically review a lot of those on my channel. And there are several of you, you know who you are, who message me asking for some recommendations on any fiction true crime books or anything in that genre. Because as we all know, sometimes reading true crime, it gets a little bit much. So I'm really excited to share this book with you guys. I really loved it, and I think that you will too. Also, because it does touch upon the paranormal, and I know y'all love that subject. So we will dive into that. But before we do, quick hello to everybody who is watching. We have a few people here in the chat. Hey, Tony Stewart, hello. Chris James, Matilda, hello. And Auntie Mimi. I like that haunted notebook behind you. So that's Auntie Mimi basically being like, yeah, I'm the one that gave that to you. I'm the one that gave that to you. So Auntie Mimi, I'm actually really glad you're here because this book does touch on the paranormal, and I know that is a little bit up your alley. Hello, Bruce Brown. Welcome. I don't think I've seen you here before, but welcome. Thank you for joining. And for everybody who is watching but not in the chat, thank you for tuning in as well. And if you want to jump in the chat, feel free. We are a nice bunch here, so you will fit right in. So to get started, this book, if you have not seen the thumbnail already, is Revived. He Should Have Stayed Dead. And this book is by Barbara Avon. So to tell you a little bit first about Barbara. So Barbara Avon is a multi-genre author. She's written romance novels, romantic thrillers, time travel, mystery, horror, and paranormal romance. In October 2022, Revived, the book that I'll be talking about tonight, was actually chosen as Horror Book of the Year by the Feed My Reads community. So that is really freaking amazing, and I'm really excited to talk about that. And as you can see, based on the genres that she writes, there is something for everybody. So if you are watching this tonight live, or if you're watching it on replay and you're like, I really liked that book, one, make sure to grab it. But two, check out all the other works by Barbara. Again, there's something for everybody. So I will keep an eye on the chat as I'm going through the book. And yeah, if you guys have any questions about it or any comments, or if you've read the book, by all means, please say so in the chat so I can make sure that we are engaging about that and that I'm not missing anything. If there's something you took away from the book that I should be making sure that I reference. Let's see. Hi, I'm a cat. Welcome. Tony Stewart, most of us are nice. Well, I mean, besides you, Mr. Beckham, be sure to order. Oh, Jesus Christ, Beckham. Welcome, welcome. So a little bit about the book for anybody who has not heard of it. So what the book will be about is Stephen Gould was a man who turned heads. Men in suits wanted to be him. Women wanted to know him. Little old ladies wished to adopt him to fill the void of missing grandsons. His surname suited him. He lived an idyllic life with his wife of 11 years, Cassie, an artist whose passion for life was so deep she blocked out the childhood memories that were the cause of her anxiety. On a rainy night, a celebratory dinner proved fateful when Stephen was struck by a car. He died for a full 60 seconds. When they revived him, his sins followed him back. Set in 1994, Revived is a haunting I knew I would butcher a word. Psychological horror that reminds us that being sorry for our sins does not free us from damnation, and that not even the ones we love the most can save us. He should have stayed dead. So I will say that description of the book right away is spot on. That is exactly what you're getting in this novel. There will be some twists and turns along the way. We will discuss some of them as the as the review goes on, but that is exactly what the reader will be getting. So without further ado, let's dive in. So as we go on, just a little bit of a heads up, because this is a fiction book. So this isn't necessarily, like, for example, a book on Ted Bundy or, Jeffrey Dahmer, where everybody kind of knows the case. So it's okay to kind of give those spoilers, if you will. This I will, as I'm going through, give you guys a bit about it, but especially when we get to the end, I will leave a lot of very key details out because I want to leave you in suspense. I know, I'm sorry, but I want you to kind of get where I was as I was reading this, where you're kind of grabbed in, and then you got to get the book to find out what happens for the rest of it. But anyway, we will lead along so you at least get the kind of basic premise besides the description of the book. So the book itself, Revived, is 139 pages. And right away, the book starts with the main characters, and that's the couple, Cassie and Stephen Gould. So right away in the book, for those of you who are a little bit more into maybe a romance aspect, it gives you that right off the bat. Because right away, Cassie and Stephen are having sex, which we learn is a very big part of their relationship. And it happens quite a bit in the book. And that's something where I didn't quite grasp the importance of that, if you will, until, like, as you read the book, you're like, okay, there's a reason behind that. At least for me, that I didn't quite catch right away. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. But it's super, super important. So we learn about Stephen himself, and I found his description very fascinating and something that I took to right away. He's 35 years old. His hair is dark. It's still thick. He's very physically fit. And we hear about how he exercises all the time. So being not only just physically fit, but looking the part is very important to him. He is described as the type where men in suits want to be him. And again, women want to know him. Cassie, on the other hand, is an artist, a painter. She has been keeping secrets from Stephen. We learn that she is taking pills every day. They were meant to kind of calm her anxiety, but she keeps them hidden in a vitamin bottle. She has other secrets too. We don't know all of them yet. As you read through the book, there's layer by layer that you get to learn what those secrets are from her. And throughout the book also, Cassie will reference these pills, and especially her shame from hiding them from her husband, Stephen. And there's a little bit of shame as well because she can't really tell him all of the dark thoughts that she's having. And right away, you're like, okay, that sounds like, for the most part, a very typical marriage, especially with such a younger couple in their kind of mid-30s, if you will. Sex would be something that would be, for the most part, very important. It's not surprising that they're at that age where they are physically fit. They do not have children of their own. They don't have children at all. And also, they may have, a secret or two that they're hiding from their spouse. So nothing right out of the way is extraordinary about this couple. Hey, Fiddle, welcome. Good to see you. So what we learned about the couple, again, nothing out of the ordinary, is they both smoke, but they are also planning to quit in a few months. They decide that one of the reasons that they need to both quit smoking is that they do want to try to conceive, to have a family. So again, they don't have any children at this point, but that's something that they do want to start, is a family. So they know, and the author says very clearly, smoking and babies, they really don't mix. So at this point in the book, we learn that they have to house sit for a friend of theirs named Jim. Part of the house sitting is because they need to care for Jim's cat. And side note, y'all know right when I got to the word cat, I was like, all right, I'm hooked. I'm hooked in this book. The cat lady here with 6 cats is hooked. So I was very, very excited. So again, throughout the book, as we have been already discussing, sex is very important to the two of them. So once again, the couple is having sex. And at this point, the book kind of starts to take a little bit of the turn from just an ordinary, married couple. So Stephen woke up in the middle of the night alone. He went downstairs, and what he found was his wife, Cassie. She was standing guard at the back door with the chef's knife in her hand. There was blood on her white nightgown, and there was 5 distinct cuts in the fabric, 5 cuts to her leg. It was then that Cassie woke up, like she had no idea of what happened. So while Stephen was attending to Cassie's wounds, there were voices beneath outside in the wind saying, "You're weak, you failed to protect her." But it's very subtle that these voices are there. And it just kind of is mentioned, and then the book carries on. Which is someone like me, I'm reading it like, wait, no. What is the meaning? What is the meaning? I want to know. But we'll get there. So they are living in a century-old house built in 1894. They were left the house from Cassie's father in his will when he passed away. Cassie gets very bad vibes from the house, and they will be contacting a realtor to sell the property. The home was once used to house servants who catered to the McAllen family. They were a wealthy family, the head of the household being a banker. Well, the house has a little bit of dark history, as we learned. One night, a crooked financier entered the home and shot and killed Mr. and Mrs. McAllen. So again, when you hear that, you're thinking the bad vibes that Cassie's getting might make sense, right? Keep that in mind. So there is also the house where Cassie and Stephen found Kathy's father deceased. So it's the same house. And what we learn throughout the book is a little bit more into who Cassie's father was and her relationship with him. That is not revealed up front. You learn it gradually as the book goes on. So when they went to the house, because they hadn't heard from Kathy's father, they found him deceased. He'd already been deceased for 5 days. Again, they made the drive because they hadn't been hearing from him, and that was a little bit out of the ordinary for the length of time that there was. So in regards to why a little bit of time went by, if you're thinking, well, why did all this time go by before they made the drive to find him? So what we learn is Cassie's father was a bit of a drinker, and it wasn't uncommon for him to go on a bender and leave his phone off the hook. But during that time where they weren't hearing from him, it was his birthday. And that was very uncommon where he didn't hear from his daughter. So that is what made Cassie and Stephen go to find him. And where they did find him, he was deceased. So, but yes, cats are people too. 100%. 100%. I got 100%. So in the first chapter as well, we read about a little girl, but we don't quite know everything about this little girl. She's kind of mentioned in the first chapter and then sparingly throughout the book. So it's like you're getting bits and pieces from the author and thinking, what is this? What does this mean? But initially, when you're told about the little girl in the book, she has ringlets in her hair and black patent shoes. She never knew her mother. Her father said that she was dead, just like he was dead, the man who was supposed to protect her, the man who let bad things happen to her. So right away, it's almost like you're getting a lot, but there's so many more questions you have about the significance of this little girl than what you're given. At this point in the book, as I said, we don't know too much, but rest assured, as the book goes on and the little girl gets mentioned again and again, you will start to learn more and more details will be revealed. At the next point in the book, we are at Stephen and Cassie's babysitting or cat sitting, if you will, at Jim's. And that is a very quick introduction. You get familiar with Jim's place, a little bit of the layout of his house, a little bit kind of the decor that he has there as well. And most importantly, the cat. So what we learn about Stephen, and for me, what I found very fascinating about Stephen, and I will get to it at the very end of the book, also in regards to my review. So when I kind of go a bit more in detail about Stephen, maybe as opposed to Cassie. Just kind of keep that in mind. That's kind of who I gravitated to. And especially at the end of the book, I'll explain why. So Stephen, in regards to his professional career, he is about a 20-minute walk to the office, and he kind of has a bit of a daily routine. He stops, he picks up, and it's very specific, 2 spinach pies on the way. He tips very graciously. He gives one of the pies in his change to somebody who is entertaining on the street. And then he also picks up the newspaper on the way from a gentleman named Luciano. He does this every single day. He does not need to pick up a newspaper on the way because where he works, there are newspapers there, but he does it nonetheless to kind of support people who are working outside. So right away, you hear these things and you hear all these wonderful traits about Stephen. And as the book's building, you just really get a good vibe from him. You're thinking all of these wonderful things in regards to him as a husband, in regards to his employment, in regards to how he treats other people. When he's at work, it's funny because the women notice him right away and they'll be the type to whisper, well, he's married. And even the guys there, they all like him. And he's just one of those people where it seems like everybody around him would have nothing but wonderful things to say. So keep that in the back of your head. So we are introduced also to another character, Rick. And Rick is Stephen's boss. We get to see their dynamic. And again, another positive thing for Stephen is he's a great worker and he is given a raise at work. And at this point in the book, it starts to go down a little bit of a background into Stephen's life. So it didn't do that earlier on. It kind of does it at this point in the book. And y'all know how I am. I like everything very chronological. And when I got to when they started in the book describing Stephen's past, I'm thinking, well, why is it at this point in the book? But it makes so much sense. And I will say, yes, perfect spot to put that. Little old chronological me who likes things in a certain order, perfect spot for the author to put that in there. Because now I have not only a full picture in my head about who Stephen is as just an overall person, but as a reader, you feel something for him and it's all positive. You like him. You think, we all know Stephen's at work. We all know that type of just genuinely good person, or our neighbor, or just someone a friend that we pass every single day. We know somebody like him. And it's very smart of the author to build that. The reader already has that connection before you start to take a level back and realize, okay, there's more to Stephen than meets the eye. His upbringing wasn't very good. His dad is described as a mean bastard, embittered with the unwanted pregnancy. His mother, a devout Catholic. And his mom died suddenly from influenza. So Stephen's dad, what he did with some of the proceeds, not the word proceeds, but life insurance, whatnot, when his wife passed away, Stephen's mother, his dad went and took that money, part of it, and bought a boat. And he named the boat Miranda. Sadly, or maybe not so sadly, depending on their relationship, his dad drowned during a violent storm. So his body is resting in a watery grave. And it wasn't until about a year after Stephen's father died that a woman named Miranda called Stephen to confess that she had been her father's lover. When Stephen found out that information, he did not take to it well, and he drank very heavily for a week. After he kind of got that out of his system, and as I would say, kind of re-entered the world after just, and it's not up to him to take on the sins of his father, but in the end, he was put on this information that he didn't really need, but was given nonetheless. And he got that out of his system. And then at that point is when he met and fell in love with Cassie. So now we are at Stephen going to dinner with Cassie and with his boss, Rick. Because remember, at work, Rick gave Stephen a raise. The dinner, there's a lot in the book about the dinner. We've all been to one of those work dinners. There's a lot of drinking from all of them, but you can tell his boss, Rick, he just likes to have a good time. And it's one of those one more round, another drink, let's just have one more, that type of thing. And Rick just doesn't seem to want the night to end, even though they all have to be back to work tomorrow. Rick just, again, he's having a good time, and he just gave his employee a raise. In the restroom, Cassie, she's not really herself in regards to, she starts to hear voices of her past enter her head. And you can tell she's having this conflict looking at herself in the mirror. There's kind of what she's putting out there for everybody else to see versus what there is actually going on in her head. And having a psychology background and kind of always being into what people are thinking in that end, I right away kind of gravitated to that because we all know somebody like that. But I kind of took it one step further when I was reading this book in regards to when I was reading that part about Cassie. I took it more of, and again, just because my mind goes to like true crime, in regards to just what people put out there, in regards to, I'll just use again the well-known example of like someone like Ted Bundy. There's what is put out there to everybody else, the confidence, the aura, the whatever you're trying to project, how everybody else sees you versus what's really going on in your head. And again, I know that's more of an extreme example. We can certainly just wind it back to just the everyday person of what we put out there, that happy face, that confidence versus what's really going on. So I just found that it was that moment in that part in the book that for me hooked me into Cassie as a person. Before I was kind of more gravitating towards Stephen, which I still did, and I'll explain why. But it was really that moment in the book where I was just like, all right, now I'm fully invested in Cassie because I see that we all get that moment. The voices in the head, maybe not so much, but it was that projecting at it, like in the mirror, like there's what I put out versus what there really is. Well, Paulcast has entered the chat. Hello. Paul, I know. I mentioned him, and yeah, here you show up. Welcome, Paul. Good to see you. So after dinner, again, it is Cassie, Stephen, and Stephen's boss, Rick. They are getting ready to leave. They've ended their night, and they all, being extremely drunk, they all have taken taxi cabs together, which means they're going to take taxi cabs to get home. The responsible thing to do, right? So when Stephen and Cassie get to their cab, Cassie realizes that she had taken off her watch at the table when she had spilt some wine on it, but she left it on the table. So Stephen was like, no worries, I'll go back. I'll go get it for you. It's heavily raining at this point outside. And the traffic cop that is in the area is yelling with the taxi driver saying, you can't park here. You can't wait for whoever you're waiting for. So the taxi driver says, all right, I'll just kind of circle around the block and then I'll just come back up. And by that time, when I get there, my patron, Stephen, will be there. So the book describes them doing that. And as they are pulling back towards the area of the restaurant where the taxi cab driver will be picking up Stephen, the cab driver had to swerve because there was a biker and he came very, very close to hitting that biker. But when he swerved the cab to avoid hitting the biker, the cab driver ended up hitting a pedestrian instead. And that pedestrian that he hit was Stephen. And Cassie knows instantly. She knows. She doesn't even have to see who was hit. She feels it. And she feels that was Stephen that was hit. So at this point in the book, again, Stephen has been hit by the taxi cab driver. Stephen did pass away, but it wasn't for very long. As we read and talked about in the description of the book, it was only for 60 seconds. But he was declared dead, if you will, for 60 seconds. Cassie is hysterical. That is her husband, the love of her life, and she was just there when it happened. And she thankfully heard the paramedics say, "Got him. He's back." So again, 1 minute, Stephen had died, but thankfully he is brought back to life by the paramedics. He ended up staying in the hospital for 2 days before being released. He, besides being hit by the car or the taxi driver, didn't sustain very many injuries. So on that end, he was very, very lucky. He just needed to take it easy, which, as we learned about Stephen early on, he's very physically fit. Doesn't sound like the type to follow hospital directions, and he didn't. He would get up out of bed and start doing like push-ups, sit-ups type of thing. So Cassie, meanwhile, like on the one hand, it's thank God the love of my life is still here, but that's a lot to process nonetheless. And at this point, she is a little bit overwhelmed and decides to take a bath. And Stephen is in another room, and he's just simply reading a book. Halfway through him reading that first chapter of the book, his page was darkened by a shadow that was eclipsing the floor lamp. Without lifting his eyes off the page right away, he's just like, "Cassie, what did you forget?" But there was no response. He looked up and he saw he was alone. There was nobody there. That night, he had a lot of trouble sleeping. He went downstairs and he decided to pull out kind of like a notepad. And that is where Cassie and Stephen would write kind of their daily list of things to do. And he opens it and he saw page after page after page where it says, "Call Doug." And it was in his writing. And that kind of alarmed him because he's just flipping through. The book doesn't necessarily say he doesn't remember writing it, but based on kind of his reactions to seeing it, that's what the reader infers, that he didn't write this. The sporadic, just page after page after page after page, wasn't something that he recalled doing. So Stephen, kind of being freaked out, shut the book, lit a cigarette, again, which he was trying to quit smoking, and he sat on the couch and he began to fall asleep, and his mind brought him back to an incident in 12th grade. And these moments where there will be several of them throughout the book that the author goes through. And when you're kind of reading that at first, you're thinking, okay, just kind of, our mind takes us back to things from our childhood or our high school years or whatnot all the time. But for this, it has very specific purposes. And each time a story starts, you kind of don't know where it's going to go. And for this one, for like the first one, as a reader, I was just kind of thinking, oh, okay, just a little bit of a recap. And then when you get to the end of it, which we'll talk about a little bit, it's kind of like, oh my God, no, there's significance to each time this plays out in the book. But the first time, at least for me, when I was reading it, I was like, oh, okay, kind of old school memory. And then I'm like, oh, no, wait, I was wrong. It was much more than that. So take a quick sip of water here. That dream that we hear about from the 12th grade. So Stephen is waiting for a kid named Eugene. Stephen was selling Eugene several hits of acid. On a Saturday night when Eugene's mother was not in the house, she was out working her, overnight shift. She got home and had to force her way into her son Eugene's room because it was blocked. And when his mother finally got through and opened the door, she found Eugene dead. His arms and legs outstretched, his palms mutilated with self-inflicted wounds. One of the things that we learn is that when Stephen was selling Eugene the drugs, he was basically saying, you're cool with this, right? Like you know how much to take or, whatnot. There's that kind of dialogue. And Eugene's like, yeah. I got this type of thing. So at this point, we read this and then Stephen wakes up. And again, memory from his 12th grade year. He makes his way to the bathroom, and before going back to bed, in the bathroom mirror, Stephen gets a glimpse. And the glimpse that he sees is Eugene. And it's Eugene's bloated reflection looking back at him. And Stephen kind of, at first, nonchalantly is like, "What's up? Get back in my head." And I was a little taken aback by that as the reader, because I'm thinking, oh my God, like that's horrifying. But Stephen didn't, it seems like he didn't think that was a big deal, or at least it didn't to me come across like it was a big deal to him. Which also, when I thought that, was like, okay, so is that a memory that he thinks about often, where it's just like, here we go again, put it out of my mind, as opposed to being completely startled, like, oh my God, I'd suppressed this memory for so long, and here it is. But that is that. So we wake up now. It's a brand new day. Cassie wakes up, Stephen wakes up, and disclaimer, this was the part in the book that really made me upset, and I know it's going to make some of you upset. So Cassie she got up, went to use the bathroom, and she found Jim's cat, because again, they're cat sitting for Jim, and his cat was dead in the toilet. I know the crazy cat lady here is like, oh my God, that's like the hardest part of the book to read. But nonetheless, it goes into a bit more detail. I will not do that to you. But anyway, the cat is deceased. And Stephen is very adamant that, Cassie, I swear I closed the door. There's no way the cat could have gotten in there. But Cassie doesn't really believe him. She's kind of questioning. Again, Stephen he just got in this accident. So there's just a lot going on. We need some cats in the back. I know we need some of my cats in the background right now to kind of ease this pain. Hey, Tony, good to see you. So yes, Stephen's saying, I swear. Cassie doesn't really believe him. And one of the things that Stephen's saying is, well, maybe the cat was able to unlock the door and get in there. Cassie just is very fed up. She just leaves the house. She's like, I'm just going to do errands. I need to get out of here. So Stephen goes back into the bathroom, kind of to figure out how the heck this cat, the cat's name was Stanley, by the way, how the cat got in that bathroom. But all the kind of ways he's figuring out how maneuvering that door, it doesn't work. So let's deduce that Stephen kind of dropped the ball and Stanley got in there. So while Stephen was in that bathroom, however, he ended up slipping on a puddle of Stanley's toilet water. And as Stephen's falling, he hits his head on the bathtub, his forehead specifically, and he's now immobile, and he just closes his eyes and goes to sleep. And at this point is when we have the kind of second dream reminder of Stephen's past. And this time it is Stephen back in 1981 in college. He's at a keg party and he meets a girl named Samantha. And the book just shortens that to Sam, to calling her Sam. The book describes the order of events that happened at the party. In a nutshell, Stephen offered her a ride back to her house after. It was out of the way, but Stephen's like, okay, that's not a problem. They talked the whole way. And when they were getting closer, if you will, to Samantha's house, she kept asking, do you think I'm pretty? Just over and over again. And it would get louder and louder to the point where Stephen's getting completely fed up. Just like, stop. Like, why are you yelling? Do you think I'm pretty? And then all of a sudden, the book describes just a serenity kind of washed over Sam. She smiled and then she said, I lied. I don't have a home. Do me a favor and throw my name up on a marquee for me. It is at that point where she opens the car door and she gets sucked outside, because think about it. The car is going at a relatively decent pace. So she gets sucked out of the car. She was rolling and tumbling joyfully backward before hitting a tree and breaking her neck. So if you're thinking, what did Stephen do wrong here? This was Samantha's actions or Sam's actions, right? Well, we learn otherwise. So when Stephen awoke, he felt kind of scraggly pieces of hair that were tickling his nose, but he was unable to scream. When he awoke, what did he see? Samantha. She was disfigured by coyotes, and she stood over Stephen. She no longer had her eyes, her lips, her cheeks, and she asked him, "Do you think I'm pretty?" And then she vanished. So this is where the book then goes into kind of what I was questioning was, well, wait a minute. Stephen didn't do anything wrong in this case. Well, what happened? So Stephen decided to so he was driving and he drove the car back to the spot where Sam was laying dying. He strategically parked the car so it looked like she was the one driving. He left the driver's side door wide open, and then he went back to school, went to classes the next day, like it was any other day. When police found Samantha, they deemed that her death was a suicide induced by alcohol and drugs, and they ultimately closed the case. Which at this point, I could see the reader going one of two ways. You could be thinking, well, yeah, she threw herself out of the car. She caused that. But you could also look at the other way of Stephen did nothing to help. And he could have called 911. He could have tried something. But even if he tried to call 911, not in an attempt to save her, which let's just go with that. Just to do right by, here's what happened. But he made her death look more gruesome than it was, in my opinion, but also completely removed himself from the situation, which was clearly, it was just the wrong thing to do. My only question as the reader in the book didn't address this, and if it did, I missed it, but I don't recall it doing it, where license plate, like I guess my thought was, wait a minute, how didn't they tie the car back to him? But again, I might have missed that, but that was my only kind of wait a minute thought. But other than that, again, Stephen's choice and how he dealt with this, not cool in regards to Sam. Okay, few people coming in the chat, few people coming in. Hi, Lil Milky, welcome. Hi, PJ, welcome. A Body in the Snow, title of the show for Karen Reed. Tony, I like how you were connecting this book to the Karen Reed case. I would say that's, yeah, that's a conversation for a later time. Just double checking. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. All right, awesome. And again, if there's any questions or comments about the book as I'm going, please, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. Let me know. So again, this is the second kind of dream where we're being brought back to Stephen's past, where we're learning, maybe this perfect guy is not so perfect. So Cassie, now we flash forward to Cassie. She left. She went to do some errands. Well, she's back at Jim's apartment and she's here with Stephen. She is still angry with him, which makes sense. And she can tell that by the time she's returned, Stephen had been drinking. She does, and the way the book describes it, I'm like, oh, we all know that. She's putting the groceries away, kind of slamming the doors. So not only is she just kind of, as a reader perspective, in her mind, she's angry at him. She's physically showing that to Stephen, like her frustration with him, understandably. Cassie, however, is now having flashbacks of her own. And her flashbacks, again, as the book goes on, we get to learn more and more about them. But this one in particular is of that little girl, the one from the beginning, right? It was that little girl with the black patent shoes. And there's a man that says to her, "Not like that, sweetheart," as he wipes at her chin. Basically, do it the way I taught you. So right away, you're just like, okay, all right, this just took a really horrific turn, because remember when she mentions the little girl with the black patent shoes earlier, there was a father, he was supposed to protect her and not let anybody hurt her, but he didn't do that. But now, as the reader, you're getting a bit more, and what you're getting is horrific. But there's still more to come, because again, these are not the only mentions of the little girl with the black patent shoes in Cassie's mind. There'll be more. So later, Cassie, again, still just kind of being annoyed with Stephen, she is painting, because as we know, she's a painter, she's an artist, and she starts to hear Stephen, and he's yelling. He's in the middle of a nightmare. So she goes and she wakes him up, and he is terrified, and he's yelling, and he's completely not coherent, if you will, and he's yelling at Cassie. He's saying, Sam is here, Sam is in the room. Cassie doesn't know who Sam is, which right away you're thinking, okay, Stephen never told her about this. So again, Cassie's freaking out. Stephen's saying, shh, be quiet, she might hear you. Cassie's getting more and more freaked out. This is not the husband that she knows. He's completely out of his mind. Stephen is saying his neck is broken, just like Sam's. Cassie wants to take him to the hospital, and he's not having it. Eventually, he starts to calm down, and he does that because he feels that Samantha is gone. Cassie is completely angry with Stephen by this point, and not only because of not understanding what's going on, but how he brushes her off so quickly after this. Instead of, babe, I'm so sorry that I frightened you, he just kind of goes to the bathroom, kind of, splashes water on his face, and is kind of like, what? What's the big deal? So she's pissed. She is pissed. And she decides she just has to get out of the house. So she leaves. Stephen says, I'll go with you, because what Cassie says she's going to do is kind of go back to check on things at their house. When I say their house, meaning her father's house that they inherited, that they're going to be selling, because bad vibes, they don't like it. So again, Stephen wants to go. Cassie's like, no, you stay here. There's leftovers. I'll call you later. And just leaves. She says she wants to be alone. So Cassie is now at, I say their place, her and Stephen's, but it was her father's. She's alone. She starts drinking. She's trying to call Stephen just to check in, but each time she calls, and she calls kind of sporadically, the phone just keeps ringing and ringing and ringing. But it isn't enough where she thinks, okay, I should leave and go back and check. She doesn't do that. She just kind of carries on with, I think, just decompressing alone and with a bottle of wine, which who would blame her? Who would blame her? I will say this is for me as the reader. And again, as the book progresses, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that kind of answered that thought. In my mind, I'm thinking, would I have left, my spouse, Stephen, and, if I put myself in Cassie's shoes in this book, would I have left him? He was in that car accident. He's recovering. Clearly just, he was at a point where I thought, we should take him to the hospital. Granted, he kind of calmed down out of it. Would I have left him in that state? I wouldn't have done that, but in the book, Cassie does. So again, I know this is not my story. It's kind of, you're following the marriage of Cassie and Stephen, but that was just kind of one where I'm thinking, girl, what are you doing? What are you doing? Stay with him. But nonetheless, you also see her frustration where she's like, I just need to be alone. I've dealt with a lot, dealing with him. It's a lot, and you don't blame her. That's just not a choice I would have made. But nonetheless, I get why she wanted to be alone. What is this, Tony? I should be paying attention. You never pay attention 100% of the time. So yeah, And I think that's, yeah, all good, Tony. All good, Tony. So again, Cassie is at the house. She is drinking. She is just decompressing, if you will, annoyed with her husband. And Cassie starts making her way through the house. And as she's doing that, there's just kind of memory after memory. They're not all good. They're not all positive in regards to a chair that she stumbles upon. It's a chair with pink and navy flowers. And we learn that that was actually the last place that her father would sit. Again, as we learned that he had passed away in the home and was deceased for 5 days before he was discovered. The armrest of the chair still stained with the smell and just the look of sweat and booze. And for no logical reason, Cassie is at the chair and she decides to pour the rest of her wine on it. She kind of thought it was a way to kind of, as the author describes, kind of like a dynamic spirit that resembled her father, just to kind of pour that wine over that chair. Very symbolic, very, you as a reader, you're like, okay, there's way more to her relationship with her father than we've read up until that point. But at least by that one act, you kind of maybe are questioning things by the little girl that's mentioned. But in regards to that act, if you kind of are just kind of reading, waiting for the next thing, you're like, all right, there's definitely a dynamic here that really wasn't that positive. So Cassie, again, is still continuing through the house, going room to room. And at this point, it's like the paranoia and anxiety starts to kick in very heavily. She starts kind of peeking behind shower curtains, looking in rooms, kind of expecting something or somebody, but the house is empty. She's the only one there. And when she went to turn to leave one of the rooms she was in, she kicked at something in her path. And what we learn about what she kicked, it hadn't been seen in decades. It's a strap that was undone. It was something that a little ghost girl had taken off. A little girl with one barefoot. A little girl missing a shiny black patent shoe. So again, we're connecting that now, right? So Stephen, back to Stephen. If you're thinking as the reader, maybe while Cassie is decompressing, maybe Stephen is kind of smartening up and sobering up and whatnot. No, not at all. Stephen, and this part in the book, I was just like, okay, all right. This perfect image of this guy, what the reader was connected to as just a genuinely great person and had all these wonderful traits and qualities. But we kind of, through his dreams, are learning of his past where it's like, oh, that's not good. Oh, that's not good either. Well, now the mask is starting to slip even more with Stephen. So he, again, not in any position to walk his way back to work, but he does. And he's completely disheveled. He is walking through the lobby where, again, on any other day, he would get all these stares and looks in the most positive of ways. They are not positive at this point. They are just, I'd say, looks of shock. This man is completely disheveled, does not belong here in the state that he's in. His coworkers see him coming and they're like, Stephen, no, you do not belong here. You should not be here. He's saying he's fine. He goes to his boss's office. Rick closes the door saying, basically, you look like shit. And this is where not only is Stephen just looking disheveled, but mentally, the reader gets to see that it's just like everything is slipping from Stephen. Everything. He is starting to hear Samantha laughing. And While that's happening, Rick is noticing that Stephen reeks of alcohol. Stephen kind of, again, in his head, he is, or what to him is real. He is seeing a headless body before him. And this is somebody new. It's a man. We don't know who that is. It's a man who had shot his brains out. I know I should have disclaimed that. Sorry. It's a man who shot his brains out, and the man, he was betrayed. The man had no idea that when he took his life, his wife was pregnant. So Stephen's seeing this man and clearly freaking out. But who is he? Who is he? Clearly, this is somebody else from Stephen's past. But who is he? At this point, there's a dialogue between Stephen and his boss, Rick, where it all makes sense. And you're like, oh my God. Like with Stephen, we can be like, all right, there was the incident in 12th grade. Okay, there was this incident in college with Sam. 12th grade with Eugene, college with Sam. And now we're getting to, all right, he's an adult. He's a professional. There's a pattern here. So Stephen asks his boss, Rick, do you remember the other guy you interviewed, Luis or Miguel? And his boss remembered, yes, Luis Rodriguez. And Rick says, quote, kind of hard to forget. I wrote his obituary. His wife called me asking to take care of it. Who ever heard someone glorifying a suicide? I guess she had nothing to say, end quote. So Stephen responds to his boss, Rick. And when you read the sentence, it's like one thing for me to say it. I feel like it doesn't do it justice. It really doesn't. When you read it, you're like, oh my God, oh my God. Stephen asks Rick, what if he should have gotten the job instead of me? And it clicks. Rick says to Stephen, you know what? I just don't have time for this. I have work to do. Go home. Don't come back till you feel better. And he also told Stephen that there was a message on his desk waiting from his stepmother, Miranda. So Stephen in his mind is already just like, Miranda, and starts going off on that end, kind of understandably, right? In regards to Miranda, the little bit that we've kind of read how she came into Stephen's life. Well, Stephen now, again, the mask it's just completely coming off in regards to physically and psychologically. Everything's coming to the forefront. And as the book goes on, I will say I don't want to say it's kind of a bit of a slow lead up, but there's a lot of positive in regards to Stephen and Cassie and their life. And then, so like there's these little breadcrumbs, which once you get to the end of the book and you finish it, you're like, oh, I know what that meant. I now see the connection to that. But just kind of as you're reading, you're like, okay. And then, however, when things start to turn for Stephen and Cassie, full steam ahead, which as a reader, you're just hooked. And you're like, I'm not putting this book down. I'm just not. But with that being said, as I said, Stephen is completely losing it. And his mind goes back now to another time, 1989. There was another incident where he was at a bar and there was a woman named Marcy. And she was there. She didn't know Stephen, but kind of approached him, and the book describes this whole interaction a lot more in detail, just kind of to get to the basics of it. She was there with a guy named Gary, and she just wanted to get him worked up. And the whole scenario that Marcy was trying to do, it ultimately kind of backfired in a big way. So Stephen kind of realized that like this whole thing was not only to kind of get Gary worked up, but Stephen was just like, you know what? I don't need a part of this. Like, I'm just getting the fuck out of here. And goes to leave. He's pissed. Steven's pissed. And Gary and Steven just keep arguing. Blinded by rage, they get outside and Steven threw Gary to the ground and just blow after blow after blow struck him. It got to the point where Gary, being on the ground, was completely unrecognizable, a creature without a face. One thing that the reader learns about is kind of Gary's overall physique, and that he has a very distinct mark, and that is of a snake tattoo on his neck. And after the beating, you just read that Steven made his way home to Cassie that night. And again, it's almost like Steven, if you're thinking, wait a minute, that kind of ties back to Sam, right? When she threw herself out of the car, but then he set up the car to look like she committed suicide. He did that, went back to college, went to classes the next day like it was absolutely nothing. Does it again here, where gets into this like horrific assault on Gary and then just goes back home to Cassie. No big deal. And that was that, which my mind was like, all right, can very easily kind of distance himself from the horrific things that he's doing, and it doesn't bother him. Why is that? Again, psychology background, my mind starts to question all of that. But what we learned is that 5 weeks later, after that assault, Gary ended up having a brain bleed, and it was directly resulting from that beating that Steven gave him. So Gary, while this brain bleed happens, he is driving and he loses control of the car, and the vehicle goes over a steep embankment and ultimately is perished before the car hit the water. So now Marcy is left basically to mourn Gary, which again, if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Marcy kind of created the situation, if you will, but Steven took it to a level it didn't need to go, clearly, and just very walked away and carried on. So Steven, we know that again, his boss was like, Rick was like, get out of here. Don't come back till you're ready to come into the office. So Steven is now back at home. Again, we had that kind of flashback to 1989, but now he's back home. And when I say back home, he is back remember, he was house sitting, cat sitting at Jim's. So Steven goes back, takes a shower, and he could sense that he really wasn't alone. The water, as the shower is running, starts to turn kind of red. It turns to blood. He turns around and he sees a bloated figure with kind of worms coming out of every kind of orifice. And he notices on the side of the neck of the person who is in front of him is a snake tattoo. So the book, and we're starting to wind down, folks. The book goes back to Cassie. So there's this back and forth in between what's happening with Steven, what's happening with Cassie. So Cassie, she's completely drunk as well. She starts going through boxes of childhood belongings because they are in that home. And one of the things that happens is a memory comes back to kind of like her conscious surface level. And it was one that she had kind of been keeping in the back. And the book describes it in a way where it's like it's been trying to make its way to the forefront, but hasn't yet. But now it has. And this is where it all connects in regards to Cassie's anxiety, in regards to her relationship with her father, in regards to the little girl with the black patent shoes. And I know some of you who are watching this are probably thinking, well, I made that connection already. Well, I didn't when I read the book, so sorry. So what we hear is her father saying to her, not like that, sweetheart, and then wiping her face, do it the way I taught you. And right away you're like, okay, the trauma that she was experiencing from her father, that was the little girl. In her mind, that was who she had been keeping out of the forefront of her mind. Which makes sense. And makes sense why she's on so many anxiety meds that she's taking, not only to, which, not that anxiety meds are a bad thing, but in this book, she's taking a lot of them and kind of hiding those kind of more painful and scary memories from and feelings from Stephen. Again, she can't even tell him. He doesn't even know she's on these, because she just has her kind of vitamin bottle, if you will. But anyway, so now this is when the reader's like, okay, this is the connection. So Cassie goes up to her old childhood bedroom. She lays down on the bed. The little ghost girl with the black patent shoes stands beside her, extends her hand. Cassie takes it, kind of now feeling an overwhelming sense of love, and she promises that little ghost girl eternal peace. So, and if you're thinking, okay, that maybe that's where the book ends. Oh, no, not even close. So the reader is now back at the hot mess known as Stephen. He is kind of hiding beneath a red blanket with a knife in his hands at this point. He is just scared. He wants the ghost to go away. And he leaves a note on the kitchen island saying, I miss you. I love you. I'm sorry. So as a reader, I'm thinking, okay, he's going to take his own life, but that's not what happens. He ends up falling asleep and he's woken up by Cassie. Cassie saying his name. And he tells Cassie, you know what, you might be right. Maybe we should go to the hospital at this point. And he goes to look at her and he realizes, Cassie's hands are behind her back and there's blood, there's blood running down her legs. And she's wearing a yellow sundress, which you're thinking, okay, why describe that? Keep that in mind. And she shows Stephen her wrists, and it's clear that she had cut her wrists to take her life. So Stephen, thinking, oh my God, basically tries to attempt to touch her, but he couldn't. He kind of goes right through her. And it's that then when he realizes that she's now among the ghosts as well. So she has taken her own life, and now she's one of the ghosts that is basically in the same room now with the other ghost that is kind of haunting Stephen at this point. Cassie says to him, because he's thinking, what did I do? And she says, it's not what I did, it's what you did, Stephen. I can see them now, And Cassie says, and I'll leave the book at this, quote, when they revived you, your sins followed you back. The people you've hurt, the lies, you should have stayed dead, Stephen, end quote. That's where I'm going to leave kind of talking about the book. There is more and a lot more that happens. But to get the rest of that, get the book. And especially if you're thinking, wait a minute, all the ghosts there, Stephen did something to. How is Cassie different in this case? Oh my God, read the dang book. It was, let me give my review at this point. So I just threw a lot at you guys in regards to a summary and then kind of my comments along the way about that. Obviously, I recommend this book to all of you. It's a great fiction book, again, which is a little bit different than I typically review on this channel, but nonetheless, for those who are looking for fiction books, kind of touching upon that true crime kind of feel, especially tying in paranormal, it hits all of those boxes. So you will love it for that. Why I also recommend this book, because it's easy to read. And I mean that in a really positive way. I personally, being the book nerd that I am, and y'all know, I love to just sit and read. And I like a book that I can sit and read in one go if I have the time to do so. In this book is that. I was actually able to read it all in one sitting, which there are some books, and I know everybody kind of has their different, like, not everybody likes to do that. And if that's the case too, this book will still be good because there are those kind of pause points in the book where you're like, okay, I can put it down here and carry on and pick it up at a later time. For me, I just like to read as long as I can if I have the time. But also, I will say, if you're one of those people that likes to put the book down, be warned, you'll be on cliffhangers, if you will, where you're like, I just want to know what happens next to Cassie or to Stephen, wherever your kind of pause point is in the book. But with that being said, it's very easy to read. So you can easily just kind of sit and read it all at once if that's something you like to do, which for me is a very positive thing. Another reason I liked the book so much, it takes you in not just different directions in regards to two people, right? In regards to Stephen and Cassie, but within each of their characters, there are so many different pathways that the book takes you, but it doesn't travel so far off those paths where you kind of start to get lost in those. Some books do that, and it can be very frustrating because you're like, wait a minute, I'm over here, and now I have to jump all the way over there and no. This book, the pathways that it breaks you down for each character is done so flawlessly that it's you don't have to pause and think, wait, where is this character going? Like, some books have that. This book doesn't do that, which is big time compliments to the author of that for making it just very easy to follow, and it just flows very simplistically in the best way where anybody who's reading this would be able to very easily follow along with it. So I appreciate that as a reader, not being taken in directions where I'm kind of losing the narrative because I'm having to be like, wait, I got to jump back to this. What happened here? Because I hate when that happens. I hate when that happens, where I'm taken out of the story and out of the narrative just because of the structure and the way that it's put. Can't stand that. But the author, perfect, seamless. So love that. The book is also, and I actually have this note as a star. So the book is, especially with Stephen, is the best example for, and if y'all watch a lot of my episodes here, then you're going to be like, oh my gosh, Danny, the saying, you're saying it again, but it fits, so I have to. So what I always say, people want monsters to look like monsters, and they don't. And the character in this book, Stephen, is the prime example of that. And I will say, I myself, and as I allowed myself to just fall into the book, into the characters, I got to the end of the book and I'm like, well, damn, was I wrong? Well, damn, was I wrong about Stephen? But the author, so Barbara sets it up in the perfect way where, and it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Strategic, where how she describes him, from everything you're reading, you're just like, there's no reason not to like him. Like, you just right away, he's just very charismatic in all the right ways in every avenue of his life. So you're hooked, and right away you're like, okay, yeah, I can vibe with him. Absolutely. And then the layers start to come undone. But again, I know I typically say people want monsters to look like monsters, and they don't. They look like Ted Bundy. They look like the most recent example I can think of, Luigi Mangione or whatnot. But I like that example because it just doesn't it's more than just kind of nonfiction true crime. It totally fits with fiction true crime as well, because as I got to the end of the book, and I was just like, oh my God, that saying completely applies to Stephen, because that's exactly what he is. The author took us through him as a husband, him as a coworker, as a colleague, as a friend, as someone who's willing to help out a friend. Yes, we will house sit for you. We will cat sit for you. How he is in regards to how he treats people kind of who are on the street working along his way to work, how generous he is. There's all these wonderful things. But then when you learn about Stephen's, I will say past, but it's not so distant, and all of these things, you're like, okay. It's a facade. It's a complete facade. And it just, yeah, that part for me, I was just like, all right, all right. And again, I can admit I was wrong about him reading the book. I was like, oh, well, damn. In regards to Cassie, what I really liked about kind of connecting with her as a character is those moments of, I don't know, maybe it's just because, female looking at another female in the book, like these little moments where I'm like, okay, I connect with her on this, or I connect with her on that, or certain ways that maybe I don't feel that way, but I'm like, she's describing so many women. And again, what really stuck to me were like, again, it was that part where I was just like, all right, I'm hooked. Now I'm hooked on her. Is again, when she's at that dinner and she's looking in the mirror and she's like, there's this image that's being projected. And then there's what's going on in my head. And it was just, yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, we've all been there. We've all been there. And yeah, so not only does the author make these two characters very, Danny, it's late go to bed. You know what, Beckham, thank you for being very aware, very aware. Some of us are on well, not me, but some of us are on the West Coast and it's still early. So yeah, I got all the time in the world, hon. But anyway, yeah, the book just makes you not only relate to the characters in a way where you're like following the narrative of the story, but also where you're like, I see certain traits in them that you either can relate to, or you're like, I know someone just like that. And I really like that because it just makes you that much more kind of completely immersed in the book and in the narrative of the story. In regards to the ending, again, I don't want to say anything more. Get the book for yourself. But yeah, it was one of those like, if you're thinking how many more kind of plot turns can there be in this book, there are several more. There are several more, and they're so good. So good. So yeah, that is my overall kind of review of the book and my impressions on the book. So again, the book, if you want to pick one up, and it is on Amazon, is Revived. He Should Have Stayed Dead by Barbara Avon. So thank you everybody for sticking around for as long as you did to hear my kind of recap and review of the book. And again, if you're thinking I gave a lot of information, I did, but the author goes way more into detail about kind of everything I touched upon. And she does it in a completely very smooth way. And you get more out of it than just like the little recaps that I did. So just be mindful of that. Tony Stewart, I'm going to give that a star. Just get the damn book. That's a very Boston thing to say. The book is wicked awesome. Just get the damn book. Again, it's available on Amazon. So easy to get and easy to read. So thank you everybody for sticking around and watching. And thank you to the author, Barbara. Thank you for this amazing book. And again, if you like this book and you are interested in any other of her works, she is, again, a multi-genre author. So something for everybody. Before I end the show tonight, I noticed you all I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat, especially if you guys had any questions. Tony, thank you. Okay, you were in there already being like, all right, Danny hasn't even finished yet. And I'm just going to say, everybody just get the book and read it. Thank you, Tony. Thank you. And I agree. My favorite bookworm. Well, thank you. Cat sounds like an interesting book. It absolutely is. Absolutely. Yes, Auntie Mimi agrees too. Interesting. See, with Auntie Mimi, I know Shirley left. Good night, Auntie Mimi. But yeah, right when it had like that kind of paranormal twist to it, I was like, all right, yeah, I already see my aunt liking this book. Let's see if we just had a few cats. I know if any of my cats were in the background tonight, it would have like taken. That one part in the book with the cat with Stanley. Oh my gosh. Honestly, so just like going off on a side tangent. So one of my neighbors the neighbors a few houses down has an orange cat named Stanley. So right when I read that, like, because you hear about the cat that they're house sitting or cat sitting, if you will. And then when I just like my mind went there and I was like, oh my God, no. But that's just cat lady. Sorry. Yeah, I'll have the cats next episode I do. The cats will be in here. Honestly, I had 2 cats in the room when I was gonna start this episode, but I'm like, I know that what can go wrong will go wrong. And one of them will jump up on the keyboard and like completely ruin the book review. And I was just like, they'll come in on Friday. It's fine. You'll get your cat fixed. Don't worry. Does yours ever go outside? No. And I know that's a controversial subject, but no, mine are living the life of privilege indoors. I can tell you that. All right, everybody. Thank you again for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. And thank you for sticking around again for this book review of Revived by Barbara Avon. Everybody enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a fantastic rest of your week. I will see you at the end of the week for a true crime ancha. Remember, everybody, until next time, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.